I'm getting a very distinct feeling that I can't win with this particular episode. Either I'm going to be told that I'm an entitled casual player who wants everything handed to him on a platter and whines too much, or I'm going to be a shill that works for the company and looking for free product out of them. Either way, this is my Kobayashi Maru. 3 of you will be geeky enough to get that. So I'm taking the road of being unapologetic, and I'm just going to present this. Take it for what you will. Let me set the stage before going into full detail here. There's this network called Sci-Fi, and they produce a show called Defiance. Now, as a part of its marketing, they tied the TV show into an MMO called, appropriately enough, Defiance. Now, the game itself is pay-to-play, meaning you purchase the game and then you don't need to pay monthly subscription fees to play it. Now, to really simplify the basic plot, aliens. No, seriously, this meme was never more appropriate. Aliens basically crash-landed on a modern Earth, and hilarity ensues. I don't want to get into the plot lines here, but the idea was that the game was to literally tie into the show universe. It was ambitious, to say the least. In fact, if I were to describe the game in one word, it would be ambitious. Basically, it's an open world, and after the storyline arc is over, you can drive around and literally do missions you find on the side of the road. Open world missions pop up periodically, and you can choose to do any of them. It's one of the reasons I was actually kind of drawn into this game. It certainly wasn't the storyline, because that's really badly written. But I really enjoyed the open world MMO idea. I like the idea of being able to just go do a mission, go jump into something that's already happening, because that was pretty cool to me. The gunplay aspects, I'm not the greatest first and third person shooter player, but I did enjoy them. Enter DLC 5, Arktech Revolution. This DLC blindsided a lot of us as Trion Worlds decided to basically alter the core mechanics of how their game would operate. For example, overnight, every player's inventory of gear was now made obsolete by this system. Now, prior to DLC 5, all guns were fairly well balanced. In theory, you could play with the same gear for months and not really feel outclassed. DLC 5 changed that, so not only does your level make the guns more powerful, but the guns now have levels themselves. Now, essentially, this means Defiance has the same power creep problem that plagues every MMO. It's not about playing the game and showing your skill within the boundaries, it's about just collecting high-numbered gear. The result is that guns now do an insane amount of damage compared to before. Now, to compensate for this, the game has implemented a major change to the mechanic, scaling enemies. I just heard a lot of players groan when I said that term, and there's a reason for that. Because a sliding scale of difficulty in an MMO has never, ever worked. But, like I said before, Trion has been, if nothing else, ambitious with this project. Kind of like the kid jumping off the roof holding an umbrella so they can fly level of ambition. To make a long story short, as you travel the world, you have a threat meter next to your name. The game will then automatically scale whatever event you are in to meet your threat level. In theory, this sounds fine. In practice, the game scales up enemies based on the number of players and their combined levels. This means that an instance can go from slightly difficult to absolutely insane when 3 people show up in the direct vicinity. Oh sure, they artificially boost the low players to close to the high-rated players' numbers, but it simply doesn't matter as the enemies are just insanely hard to kill once they're buffed. The players on the Defiance forums have called them bullet sponges. You can literally empty 100 rounds of any kind of ammunition point blank and they won't even flinch, but they'll happily slaughter you in 1 or 2 melee swipes. This also brings me to their new armor system. Now, from the beginning, instead of wearing armor, everyone had a high-tech shield that absorbs bullets. Don't ask, just take it at face value. Now, the shields, as well as the enemies, have armor plates. Now, each plate erases 10% of incoming damage. On players, this shield breaks like paper mache, and on enemies, it doesn't. And bad guys have 5 to 7 armor plates on them, on average, because any open world has an average threat rating of 10 out of 10. There's a lot more to what they did, but just these few things have led to some pretty disastrous results. Yes, I admit that I have bias here, but I can back it up. The first issue is that Defiance has become a gear quest. Trion tried to spin their decision by saying it was the lack of more powerful gear that was unsatisfying for players, but I for one enjoyed the fact that you didn't have to quest for higher numbers constantly. Let me draw a real-world parallel. This is one of my paintball guns. Yeah, take a drink. I've had this one since 2003. I know how it performs, I know how it shoots, I know how it feels in my hand when the hopper's almost empty. Consistency in your gear allows you to work on your skill rather than trying to constantly get used to new stuff. I look at the gear chase in MMOs pretty much the same way. If you're constantly changing your gear styles and the effects, you can't predict what the outcome of your actions will be with any reliability. By the time you get used to a new piece of gear, you have to get a higher level one and the cycle begins again. Now some will argue that once you have the top end gear, you gain stability again, but at least in Defiance, it really doesn't matter. Even at threat level 10, players can overgear world events, and it's not uncommon to see a world boss taken down in less than 15 seconds. That said, there are instances that become impossible because of the sliding scale for some reason. A couple people show up with a lot of power, and the game compensates with 3 times the bad guys with 10 times the hit points. You know things are a little ridiculous when 15 rockets are shrugged off by a trash mob? Just saying. As of this recording, it's been about 2 weeks since DLC 5 has dropped, and in that time, they've rolled out several hotfixes, at least rolled it back to one hotfix once because it was completely messed up, and they've lost a huge chunk of their player base. And I don't say that lightly. Prior to this DLC, it was common to see 70 plus players in an open world event. Now, you can still find these events, but rarely with the same numbers of players in them. Even look at the forums, a lot of players are voicing their discontent with one simple word: goodbye. Which has been met with people saying good riddance, and I love the new changes, hence the Kobayashi Maru. Any way you throw your hat, you're gonna get your skivvies flamed off. It's divided the community, to say the least, and Tryon had to know it was going to do this. Which kind of leads me to a more important question, at least in my mind. Why would a company, on their 5th DLC, change the core mechanics of how their game works? Well, money. Okay, that's a really strong statement. It's one that's echoed by a lot of players and ex-players of the game who have labeled DLC 5 as pay to win, and frankly, it's hard to disagree with them. You have to consider that one way of increasing the power of your weapon is this new currency they rolled out called Artforge. Now you can get 1 or 2 of these things by doing large events, which kind of feels like bricks in the Grand Canyon level of futility, or you can buy them in the cash shop. 500 Artforge sells for about $20 US, and it takes about 30 or 50 of these things to upgrade a decent weapon. Even then, the upgrades you get are a joke, and you need to upgrade several times before your gun becomes useful again. Or you can buy the DLC for $10 and get 1,000 Artforge points, but then again, buying this gives you access to the most powerful weapons in the game anyway, so you really don't need to upgrade your old stuff. Weapons that, I should mention, you can't get without buying the DLC, so when you combine this with some fairly ridiculously priced items in the cash shop, it really does appear like a straight up money grab. We can argue for days whether that makes it pay to win, but in the court of public opinion, it did. Many people are steering away from the game now because it's becoming a pay-to-win title. If you think a toxic community is bad for a game, the label pay-to-win is a death sentence. It doesn't help their cause when their own sales pitch says, quote, only the best equipped will survive. There are other ideas too, like players feel like they need to progress in the game, and one of the ways you can feel like you're progressing in the game is when you can see your numbers getting bigger and bigger. Okay, that's fine. I'm doing 20,000 points of damage when I shoot a guy in the head now. Great. Too bad that big number is bloody meaningless. If you look at all this through naive goggles, this could actually be the case here. I mean, maybe Tryon wanted to make the players more powerful, and they saw it make the bad guys pushovers, so they've compensated by making the bad guys tougher and throwing more of them at the players, but thing is that, ironically, the higher level gear does less net damage than before. You shoot a guy in the head and his health bar doesn't move, you might as well have done nothing. They've actually weakened the individual player by making them more powerful. Now the same goes for team players as well. I mean, Defiance also destroyed the one thing they had going for them in these large-scale open-world events. The game punishes you for helping people by making the bad guys harder to kill the moment you enter the area. You almost have to lone wolf the game just to survive. Again, weakening the team player by telling them that teaming up will be punished by the sliding scale of difficulty. I think this is why the outcry was as loud as it was. The game promised us a more rewarding experience, but in reality, they made it less rewarding. Now combine that with the apparent pay-to-win model and the company's laissez-faire attitude, and you get this mass exodus that's been happening. There have been a lot of other conspiracy theories worthy of note. My favorite is that they're trying to sink the game to shave costs by driving most players off. There's 2 problems with this. The first one is that the TV show Defiance will be entering Season 2 this summer, so that's not going anywhere. The other is that popularity is not an insurance policy. Ask any City of Heroes fan. One of the only other scenarios that makes sense to me is that the dev team listened to a focus group of hardcore players who spend money hand over fist on things like outfits and vehicles and inventory slots who complained the game was too easy and they're going to cater to them because they spend more money than the rest of us. Make it harder. Next week, that needs its own show. I can already hear a lot of critics saying, dude, you just suck at first and third person shooters. Alright. Give me one of these things and I'm going to have a hard time hitting the broadside of a barn. I admit that. Let me have this thing. I'll drive the nails in for you.